cake had 71 candles on it. I know because I counted them while I sat alone at the kitchen table and watched them burn down, one by one, until the wax dripped onto the frosting and the smoke curled up toward the ceiling of a house that hadn't heard real laughter in almost 2 years. My daughter had called that morning, not to wish me happy birthday, to tell me she couldn't make it. Something came up with the renovation, she said. The contractor moved the schedule around and she needed to be there. You understand, Mom, we'll celebrate next weekend. Promise. My son didn't call at all. I found out later he was at a wine tasting in Napa. I found out from his wife's Instagram, which I was not supposed to know he had. I blew out the candles myself, made a wish I didn't believe in, ate one slice of the lemon cake I had baked from scratch because lemon was my favorite, not theirs, and for once I had made something just for me. Then I covered the rest with plastic wrap, put it in the refrigerator, and sat in the living room in the dark for a long time. My name is June Alderton. I am 71 years old. I spent 45 years putting other people's happiness above my own, and on the night of my birthday, sitting alone with melted candles and half a cake, I finally understood that nobody had asked me to do that. I had done it myself. And the people I had done it for had simply let me. Let me tell you how I got here. My husband Ray and I were married in the spring of 1978. We were both 24. He was an electrician. I was a third-grade teacher. We had $30 between us after the wedding and thought we were the richest people alive. We rented a small house in Knoxville, Tennessee, the kind with thin walls and a landlord who fixed things slowly, and we made it a home the way young people do. With second-hand furniture and paint, we mixed ourselves, and a garden Ray put in the first summer because he said a house needed something growing in it. Our daughter came first, then our son 3 years later. I took a leave of absence from teaching when they were small, went back part-time when they started school, and spent the years in between driving to soccer practice and sitting in the bleachers of school gymnasiums and helping with science fair projects at midnight. Ray worked long hours. I covered everything else. That was our arrangement, unspoken, assumed, permanent. What I remember most about those years is the noise. The house was never quiet. Backpacks dropped in the hallway, cereal bowls in the sink, the television too loud, the arguments over nothing that were over in an hour. I used to long for silence. I didn't know what silence actually felt like until it arrived and stayed. Our daughter was the ambitious one. She left Tennessee for a marketing job in Charlotte when she was 23 and never really came back, not in the way that matters. She married a man named Stuart who wore expensive watches and talked about real estate at every dinner and looked through me like I was a window he didn't need to look at. They had 2 children I barely knew, a boy and a girl who called me Grandma June in texts and saw me at Christmas when it didn't conflict with Stuart's family's plans, which it usually did. Our son stayed closer in geography, which I mistook for closeness. He lived 40 minutes away in the same city. He had a good job, a nice truck, a girlfriend who eventually became his wife and who I always felt was tolerating me rather than welcoming me. They had 1 daughter. I babysat her every Tuesday for 4 years so they could have date nights and sleep in on Saturday mornings. I never once said no. I never once thought to. Ray retired at 63. That was when I first noticed the look on his face when a weekend passed without anyone stopping by. He didn't say anything. That was Ray's way. He processed things internally and came out the other side quietly. But I would catch him sometimes, standing at the front door for a moment after checking the mail, looking at the driveway as if he expected someone to pull in. "They're busy," I always said. He always nodded. He got sick at 67. It came fast the way some things do. Like weather that turns before you've packed an umbrella. Stage 3 kidney disease that progressed to stage 4 within 8 months. I moved his recliner into the bedroom so he could see the backyard from bed. I learned to cook low-sodium everything. I drove him to dialysis 3 times a week for 11 months, sat in the waiting room with a paperback I never actually read, and drove him home again. I called our daughter when the doctors told us what we were dealing with. She said she would try to get up soon. She got there once, 4 months after I called. for a long weekend that ended early because Stuart had something. Our son came more often, once a month, sometimes more. He would sit with his father for an hour, watch part of a game, and leave. It was something. I told myself it was something. Ray died on a Tuesday morning in October. He was holding my hand. The room was very quiet. Outside the window, his garden had gone to brown, the way gardens do in fall, and I remember thinking I needed to put it to bed before winter. At the funeral, both my children held me. They said all the things people say. They would be there for me. They would check in. I would not go through this alone. My daughter flew back to Charlotte on Thursday. My son came by the following Sunday and has not come by since without being asked, and even then, inconsistently. I spent the winter alone in a way I had never been alone before. There is a specific kind of silence in a house where someone used to be. It isn't just quiet. It has weight and texture. You hear it most in the mornings, which were always Ray's time. The coffee pot, the news on low, his boots on the kitchen floor. I would wake up, and the silence would be the first thing I felt before I even opened my eyes. I kept going. That's what I did. I called my children on Sundays. My daughter usually answered, talked for 7 minutes, asked about my health, mentioned something about the kids, and moved on. My son let it go to voicemail about half the time. I did not say I was struggling because I was not sure I had permission to struggle, which is a sentence I would spend months unlearning. My birthday was in March. I had mentioned it in February, casually, during a call with my daughter, just that it was coming up, that I thought maybe we could all get together. Something simple. She said that sounded nice. I took that as a yes. I bought a lemon cake. I set the table for 4. No one came. I ate my piece of cake and I sat in the dark, and something in me shifted. Not broke. I want to be clear about that. Things do not have to break for them to change. Sometimes they simply move, like tectonic plates, slow and silent, until one morning the landscape looks different and you realize it's been shifting for years. The next morning, I called my financial advisor, not the one my son had recommended 18 months earlier, who was also his friend from college and whose advice always seemed to trend toward consolidating my assets in ways that would be easier to manage. I called a woman named Adeline Foss, who came recommended by a woman from my book club who had been through a difficult divorce and knew things about protecting yourself that I had never needed to know before. I want to understand everything, I told Adeline. What I have, where it is, what it means, and what my options are. She spent 2 hours with me on the phone. When we were done, I understood that Ray and I had been more careful than I knew. The house was paid. There was a life insurance policy. There were investments Ray had made quietly over the decades, small and steady, that had grown in the way quiet things do when nobody is rushing them. I was not wealthy, but I was not helpless, and I had been behaving as though I were both. I started paying attention. My son called in April, which was unusual. He normally texted, "Mom, I need to talk to you about something." I heard it in his voice immediately. That particular register, the one I had been hearing my whole life, that dropped half a note when he wanted something and was preparing to ask in a way that would make saying no feel like cruelty. "We've been looking at a house," he said. "It needs some work, but it's a great neighborhood. Really great schools for Lily." "That's wonderful," I said, and waited. "The down payment is a little more than we've got liquid right now. We were wondering if you'd be willing to help bridge the gap. Just as a loan, we pay it back." "How much of a gap?" $45,000. I set the phone down on the table and looked out the window at Ray's garden, which I had cleared and mulched in October, and which would need to be planted soon. I thought about the Tuesday afternoons I had spent at that house. My granddaughter sticky with Cheerios on my lap, the way she used to fall asleep against me. I thought about last Tuesday and the Tuesday before, and the month of Tuesdays I had not been needed for since she started kindergarten and the babysitting ended without ceremony. "I'm going to have to think about that," I said. "Mom, it's not like you're going to spend it. You don't go anywhere." That was the sentence, not the money. That sentence. "I'll call you back," I said. I did not call him back that day. I called Adeline instead. Then I made an appointment with a lawyer my book club friend had recommended, a woman named Christine Hartley who handled estate planning and did not know my son's friends. My daughter called the next morning. I almost laughed. "I heard you and your brother talked," she said. "We did," I said. "Mom, 45,000 is a lot. We've been thinking, Stuart and I, that maybe it would make sense for you to talk to someone about your finances. A professional, just to make sure everything is set up properly. Stuart knows some people who specialize in this. I'm sure he does. It's just that the house, the insurance, Dad's pension, that's a significant amount to manage alone at your age. We want to make sure you're protected." Protected, I repeated. She kept talking. She used words like trust and management. And she said the word estate twice. She was describing my eventual death and what she expected to happen to my money after it. And she was calling it concern. "I've already made an appointment," I said. "Oh, with who?" "A woman named Christine Hartley. She was recommended to me." Silence. "Who recommended her?" "A friend." "Mom, don't you think you should talk to us before making decisions like this? We're your family." I didn't answer that directly. I said goodbye and hung up. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went to the small room Ray had used as an office, the one that still smelled like him in some inexact way I couldn't name, cedar maybe, or the particular soap he used, and I sat in his chair. I had not gone through his filing cabinet. There were things I had simply been too tired to face. I opened it that night. In the back of the bottom drawer, behind insurance documents and the deed to the house, and a folder of receipts he had kept for reasons I would never understand, there was a small wooden box I had never seen before. Inside it were index cards, maybe 30 of them, covered in Ray's handwriting. He wrote in a small, precise hand, very different from how he talked, which was slow and careful and full of pauses. The cards were not dated. They were not addressed to anyone. They were things he had written down. I understood when he could not say them out loud. I read every one. Some of them were about me. He wrote about the way I hummed when I was concentrating. He wrote about the time I drove through a blizzard to get to a student's mother who had called the school because she didn't know who else to call. He wrote about a conversation we'd had early in our marriage when I told him I wanted to be the kind of person who left things better than she found them. And he wrote that I had succeeded, that I had always succeeded, that he was sorry he hadn't said it enough while he could say it out loud. Some of the cards were about our children. He had noticed. He had watched them become who they became, and he had said nothing because he did not know how, because he did not want to cause trouble, because he kept hoping things would shift on their own the way he hoped the weather would change before he had to name it. He wrote that he was sorry. He wrote that I had deserved better from them and from him. He wrote, "June, when I'm gone, please don't make yourself small to fit in their lives. You were never small. They just needed you to be." I sat in that room until the sun came up. I met with Christine the following week. I told her what I wanted, and she did not flinch or suggest I slow down or recommend I discuss it with my family first. She simply helped me do it. I restructured everything. It took 3 appointments and 1 long afternoon with paperwork. And when it was done, I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Not happy exactly. Settled. Like I had finally stood up straight after years of leaning. I called my son when it was finished. "I'm not going to be able to help with the house," I told him. "Mom, are you serious? Completely. This is about the birthday, isn't it?" "I told you I forgot I had the Napa trip already planned. This isn't about the birthday." "Then what is it about?" "It's about the fact that you called your mother for the first time in 6 weeks to ask for $45,000, and your opening line was that I don't go anywhere anyway." He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't mean it like that." "I know you didn't." That's almost the harder part. "Mom, I love you. I know that too. But I am done being an emergency fund. I love you. That doesn't change. But loving you doesn't mean I have to fund a life that has no room for me in it." He hung up before I did. My daughter called 2 days later. When I told her I had completed the estate planning with Christine and would not be discussing it further, she said I was making decisions impulsively out of grief. She said Ray had only been gone 7 months and I wasn't thinking clearly. She said they might need to have me evaluated. I felt something go very still inside me. Did you just say what I think you said? Mom, we're worried. You are worried about my money. There is a difference. And now I know the difference, and that matters. I hung up. The next few months were the strangest of my life. Not bad, exactly. Strange. My son did not call for 6 weeks. My daughter sent a stiff text every Sunday that felt like obligation performed efficiently. Neither of them visited. But I started doing things. I had always liked plants. Ray's garden had been his project, and I had helped around the edges, weeding and watering without ever calling it mine. That spring, I claimed it. I planted tomatoes and 2 kinds of basil and a row of marigolds along the front because I liked how they smelled in the heat of the day. I put in a raised bed for herbs. I bought gloves that actually fit. I drove to the nursery on a Saturday morning and spent 2 hours talking to a man named Walt who worked there on weekends and knew more about Tennessee growing conditions than anyone I had ever met. I joined a watercolor class at the community center on Thursday evenings. I was terrible for the first 6 weeks. Then I became less terrible. My instructor, a small, quiet woman with silver braids who had been painting for 40 years, told me I had good instincts but was too careful, that I needed to let the brush do more and control it less. I thought about that for a long time after she said it. I met a woman named Blythe at the watercolor class who had lost her husband 2 years before mine and who had gone through something with her own children that she told me about one evening over coffee at the place down the street from the community center. She said, the hardest thing was realizing I had spent 50 years being who they needed me to be, and the hardest and best thing was spending the next years being who I actually was. I wrote that down when I got home. Then something happened that I did not expect. I was in the garden on a Saturday morning in June, on my knees with my hands in the dirt, when my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize, a Charlotte area code. I almost let it go. I answered. Grandma June? The voice was uncertain, but trying to sound certain. Young. I sat back on my heels. Ivy? My granddaughter, 17 years old. I had not spoken to her since the Christmas before last, which had been 3 days at my daughter's house in Charlotte, tense and short, everyone performing a version of family, while nobody actually sat still. I heard my mom talking to Dad about you, she said. She said you changed your will, and you're not thinking straight, and you might need someone to look after you. What did you think about that? A pause. I thought it sounded like she was worried about money, not about you. I laughed. The sound surprised me. I hadn't heard it for a while. Can I come see you? She said. I have a week before summer program starts. I looked you up. You're only 6 hours from Charlotte. I could drive. You have your license? Since January. I'm a good driver, Grandma. I've only had 2 parking tickets. Come, I said. But let me call your mother first. My daughter was not pleased. That was her first response, that she was not pleased. Then she moved to concerned, then to suspicious. Is this about the will? She asked. Are you trying to turn her against me? I'm trying to know my granddaughter, I said. She reached out to me. That is all this is. She came the following Friday in a car she had borrowed from a friend, a small blue thing with a dent in the bumper that she was not responsible for. She explained immediately upon arrival. The previous owner had backed into a pole. She stood on my front porch with a duffel bag and looked exactly like her mother had looked at 17 before she became who she became, before the shape of her got smoothed down and pointed in a particular direction. We stayed up until midnight the first night talking. She sat across from me at the kitchen table with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea and told me about her life, her school, her plans. She wanted to study environmental science. Her parents wanted her to study business or law, something practical, something with a clear upward path. She felt like she was being assembled rather than raised. I know what it feels like to disappear inside someone else's idea of who you should be, I told her. I spent a long time doing it. How did you stop? I'm still figuring that out. But I started by admitting I had choices I hadn't been using. She was quiet for a minute. She turned her mug around in her hands. Then she said, I don't want to be like them. I love my mom, but I don't want to be like her. You don't have to be. That's the thing. They don't tell you when you're young. You think you inherit who your parents are, but you actually get to choose. She looked at me. You're choosing right now. I suppose I am. She helped me in the garden every morning. She was not a natural, but she was willing, which I've found matters more. She asked the right questions in the watercolor class. She made me show her Ray's index cards one evening, and she read them very slowly, and at the end she said, he really loved you. He did, I said. She said, do you think my parents love each other like that? I don't know, I said honestly. I think they love the life they've built. That's not nothing, but it's different. On the last night of her visit, we sat on the back porch and watched the fireflies come up from Ray's garden. She said, can I come back? Anytime, I said. Even after I go to college? Especially then. She left on a Sunday morning. I stood in the driveway and watched her car go down the street and turn the corner, and I felt something I could not immediately name. It took me until I was back inside with my coffee to identify it. Useful. That was the word. I felt useful in a way that came from being genuinely needed rather than conveniently available. My son came to see me in October. He called on a Wednesday to ask if he could come that weekend. No preamble, no ask for money, no particular agenda announced. He drove himself, left his wife at home, arrived at noon with a container of soup from a place he knew I liked, though I had not mentioned I liked it recently. He must have remembered. We ate at the kitchen table, the same table. It looks different now. I put a plant in the center, a small rosemary bush in a blue pot, and hung a print from the watercolor class on the wall behind it. One of mine, not very good, but mine. He was quiet for a while before he said, Mom, I owe you an apology. I'm listening, I said. I treated you like you were always going to be there, like you were furniture almost, like I could walk past you 100 times without looking, and you'd still be there when I finally stopped. I didn't see you. I saw what you could do for me. And I am sorry for that. I looked at my son. He looked, in that moment, younger than he had in years. Not weaker, just more honest about what was underneath. I know you are, I said. Can we try? He asked. Not pretend nothing happened, but try. We can try, but things will be different now. I'm not going to make myself small to fit into your schedule. If you want to be part of my life, you have to actually be in it. I know. He cried a little, which surprised me. I held his hand across the table, the same table where he had learned his multiplication tables and eaten 10,000 breakfasts. And we didn't solve everything. Some things cannot be solved. But when I'm with you, when I'm Miss Date, a real conversation, the kind I hadn't had with him since he was young enough that real was all we had. My daughter is not called in 2 months. She sent a card at Christmas, signed with all their names in her handwriting. Her name and Stuart's, and the children's, everyone accounted for. I put it on the mantel for 2 weeks and then took it down. I do not know if she will come around. I have stopped waiting to find out. That is not defeat. That is something else, something harder to name, but lighter to carry. Ivy applied to 3 schools in Tennessee. She told me over text a long one for her, full of details. Her parents wanted her to apply to schools in the Northeast. She applied to those too, to keep the peace. But Tennessee was what she wanted, and Tennessee was what she applied for. She sent me the application essay. I read it twice. It was about the environment, yes, but it was also about choosing, about learning that the life you want has to be built, not assumed. I wrote back, this is wonderful. You're going to be wonderful. She wrote back, I learned that from you. I am 71 years old and I am learning what it means to take up space, not aggressively, not in a way that requires anyone to move, just enough, just to the edges of the room I'm actually standing in. Ray's garden is coming back this spring. I've ordered seeds, more varieties than he ever tried, tomatoes and squash, and a row of sweet peas along the back fence that will bloom in colors I have never grown before. I don't know exactly how they'll do, but I'm going to try things I haven't tried. That seems like a reasonable way to spend whatever years I have left. The house is not quiet the way it was. Ivy calls on Sundays now. My son comes about once a month, sometimes more. Blythe from watercolor class comes for coffee on Thursday mornings before class, and we sit at the kitchen table and talk about our paintings and our gardens, and occasionally our children. Though we have learned not to let our children take up more room in the conversation than our own lives, Ray's index cards are in the top drawer of my nightstand. I read one sometimes, not every night, just when I need to be reminded. The one I come back to most is a short one, just 2 sentences. He wrote, "You always gave more than you needed to. Give some of that back to yourself now. I'm working on it, Ray. I am working on it."